Hey TVC kids, it is day 3 and we are starting chapter 2 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I hope you guys have listened to the beginning, but where we ended, Lucy had just made it through the wardrobe and she found a lamppost and she found some snow and she found a fawn. So here's where we start with chapter 2 with that fawn. It's called What Lucy Found There. "Good evening," said Lucy, but the fawn, who was busy picking up all his parcels, at first he did not reply. When he had finished, it made a small bow to her. Good evening," said the fawn. "Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve?" "My name is Lucy," she said, not quite sure what he was saying. "But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl?" said the fawn. "Of course I'm a girl," said Lucy. "You are, in fact, human?" "Of course I'm human," said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure," said the fawn. "How stupid of me. But I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I'm delighted. That is to say," and then he stopped, as if he had been going to say something he had not intended, but had remembered in time. Have you ever done that? Where it starts to come out and like, ooh, pull back. And instead he said, delighted. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is," and if you know at home, say it really loud. "Tumnus!" You're right. One of my favorites, Mr. Tumnus. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "And may I ask?" "Oh, Lucy, daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumnus. "How have you come into Narnia?" "Narnia? What is that?" said Lucy. "This is the land of Narnia," said the fawn, "where we are now. All that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Cair Paravel, which is on the eastern sea. And you have come from the wild woods of the west?" I got here through a wardrobe and a spare room," said Lucy. "Ah," said Mr. Tumnus in a rather melancholy voice, "if only I'd worked harder in geography. I should no doubt know all about those strange countries. Is it too late now?" "But they aren't countries at all," said Lucy, almost laughing. "It's only just back there, at least, I'm not sure. It's summer back there." Meanwhile, Mr. Tumnus said, "It is winter in Narnia, and it has been for so ever long, and we shall both catch a cold if we stand here in the snow." So she said, "Wait, I left England and it was summer, and I've come through the wardrobe and it's winter." And Mr. Tumnus says, "It's been winter here for so ever long." "Daughter of Eve, from the far land of Spare, where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me?" "Thank you very much, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy, "but I was wondering whether I should get back." "It's only just around the corner," said the fawn, "and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake." "Well, it's very kind of you," said Lucy, "but I shan't be able to stay very long." "If you will take my arm, daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumnus, "I shall be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. That's the way. Now off we go." Do you remember Mr. Tumnus had his umbrella and all his packages and his tail put over his arm? And so now he grabbed his umbrella and his tail and Lucy's arm, and off they went. And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood, arm in arm with this strange creature, as if they had known one another all their lives. They had not gone far before they came to a place where the ground became rough, and there were rocks all about, and little hills up and little hills down. At the bottom of one small valley, Mr. Tumnus turned suddenly aside as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock. But at the last moment, Lucy found he was leading her into the entrance of a cave. How many of you guys like exploring caves? I know some of you do because you come home and you tell me, you come to church and you tell me about them. Sometimes I'm a little nervous about it. But Lucy went. As soon as they were inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a firewood. When Mr. Tumnus stooped and he put a piece of the wood out of the fire with a neat pair of little tongs and lit his lamp. What was inside the cave? "Now we shan't be long," he said, and immediately put a kettle on. That was his home, and she was going to have tea with the Tumnus in the cave. Lucy thought she'd never been in a nicer place. This must have been a nice cave. It was a little dry, clean cave of reddish stone with a carpet on the floor and 2 little chairs, one for me and one for a friend, said Mr. Tumnus. And a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece over the fire, and above that a picture of an old faun with a gray beard. In one corner there was a door which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Tumnus's bedroom, and on one wall was a shelf full of books. No wonder why she liked it so much. Lucy looked at these for a while as she was setting out the tea things. They had titles like The Life and Letters of Silenus, or Nymphs and Their Ways, or Men, Monks, and Gamekeepers, A Study in Popular Legend, or Is Man a Myth? "Now, daughter of Eve," said the faun. And really, it was a wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg, lightly boiled, and then sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and then toast with honey. Boy, they like their toast. And then sugar-topped cake. Yum. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the faun began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell of life in the forest. He told all about the midnight dances and how the nymphs who lived in the wells and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fauns, about long hunting parties after the milk-white stag, who would give you your wish if you caught him, and how feasting and treasure-seeking with the red dwarves in deep mines and caverns far beneath the forest. And he would talk about summer. Summer? I thought it was always winter there. I guess it used to be summer, when the woods were green and old Silenus on his fat donkey would come to visit them, and sometimes Bacchus himself, and then the streams would run with wine instead of water, and the whole forest would give itself up to jollification for the weeks on end. Don't you just love that word, jollification? What can you do at home this week to bring jollification to your family? I'm going to try too, all right? "Not that it isn't always winter now," he added gloomily. So he told all these beautiful stories about summer and the nymphs and the fairies and being out in the woods and the green. And then he said, "But now it's always winter." To cheer himself up, he took out from his case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked as if it were made of straw and began to play. Remember that flute? And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours when she shook herself and said, "Oh, Mr. Tumnus, I'm so sorry to stop you, and I do love that tune. But really, I must go home. I only meant to stay for a few minutes." She'd been gone a long time. "It is no good now, you know," said the faun, laying down his flute and shaking his head very sorrowfully. "No good," said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. "What do you mean?" "I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what has happened to me." But a moment later, she asked Mr. Tumnus, "Whatever is the matter?" For the fawn's brown eyes were filled with tears, and then the tears began trickling down his cheeks, and soon they were running off the end of his nose, and at last he covered his face with his hands, and he began to howl. "Mr. Tumnus, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy in great distress. Don't, what's the matter? Aren't you well? Dear Mr. Tumnus, do tell me what's wrong." But the fawn continued sobbing as if its heart would break. And even when Lucy went over and put her arm around him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. He merely took the handkerchief and kept on using it and wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to use anymore, so that presently Lucy was standing in a damp patch. He had cried so much he made a little puddle on the floor. He was so sad. Mr. Tumnus bawled, Lucy in his ear, shaking him, "Do stop it at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a great big fawn like you. What on earth are you crying about?" Oh, sobbed Mr. Tumnus. "I'm crying because I'm such a bad fawn." "I don't think you're a bad fawn at all," said Lucy. "I think you're a very good fawn. You are the nicest fawn I've ever met." How many fawns have you met? Probably the same amount she had met. One, but it was the nicest fawn she'd ever met. "Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew," said Mr. Tumnus between his sobs. "No, I'm a bad fawn. I don't suppose there will ever be a worse fawn since the beginning of the world." "But what have you done?" asked Lucy. "My old father," said Mr. Tumnus, "that's his picture over the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this." "A thing like what?" said Lucy. And that's where we're going to end. What has he done? What do you think he's done? Do you think it's really bad? We're going to see tomorrow. All right, I want to see you guys tomorrow. Draw some pictures of what you think Mr. Tumnus's house looked like. And maybe, just maybe, you should go ask your mom and dad and sisters and brothers if you could have a nice tea together. All right, I'm going to go have some tea. Bye.